The courtroom air was thick with anticipation, every breath tense as Judge Everett's gavel thundered onto the mahogany bench, slicing through the silence. It was as if time itself had stopped in that instant. Eyes darted, hearts pounded, and every juror's hand gripped their seat, knowing they stood at the edge of something irreversible. Anna Carter, the lead prosecutor, barely blinked as she slid damning evidence across the table, her voice cutting through the charged air. Anna said, "This is the final piece, Your Honor." The defense attorney, Marcus Reed, a man weathered by too many lost causes, glanced at his client, Daniel Hayes, a pale 32-year-old man whose eyes burned with silent dread. Daniel said nothing, gripping the edge of the defendant's table, knuckles white. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Daniel's mother, Evelyn, sat rigid in the second row, her tears glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. Judge Everett's gaze was cold and unmoving, his expression unreadable. He said, "The court will hear no further outbursts." The court stenographer's keys clacked furiously, recording every shattering moment. Flashbulbs from the press snapped, the entire world bearing down on Daniel's hunched shoulders. As the gavel echoed, Daniel's mind raced back to the night of the incident, haunted by memory and fear. But today, in this suffocating chamber of justice, his silence screamed louder than words. Justice would be swift, but would it be true? The silence that followed the gavel's thunder was almost unnatural, filling the chamber with a suffocating tension. Anna Carter's voice rang out, strong and measured, echoing off the marble walls. Anna said, "The evidence is irrefutable, and the defendant's silence is damning." Marcus Reed leaned forward, his voice quiet but fierce. "Daniel has a right to silence. That does not make him guilty." Judge Everett raised a single eyebrow, studying Marcus for any sign of weakness. In the gallery, Daniel's mother tried to stifle a sob, her grief mixing with dread. The jury exchanged worried glances, uncertain and restless. Daniel sat motionless, every muscle in his body coiled tight, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on a distant spot. The weight of expectation bore down on him, relentless and crushing. The world wanted a confession, a collapse, something that would make sense of this chaos. But Daniel gave them nothing. The room was charged with accusation, suspicion, and the unresolved ache of tragedy. Every second stretched longer than the last. Anna's gaze was fixed, relentless, as if daring Daniel to speak. Marcus placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, grounding him in the present. For Daniel, every heartbeat was another reminder that his fate might already be sealed, and that the only thing standing between him and ruin was his silence. In the tense hush that hung over the courtroom, Judge Everett leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. Judge Everett said, "This court will not be swayed by emotion. We deal in evidence and law." Anna Carter squared her shoulders, her eyes flicking to the jurors, as if daring them to look away. Anna said, "The defendant had motive, opportunity, and means. There is no room for reasonable doubt." Marcus Reed met her gaze, refusing to yield. Marcus said, "No evidence can replace the truth, and silence does not equal guilt." The jury members shifted in their seats, visibly unsettled by the sharp exchange. Daniel Hayes barely moved, face pale, breathing slow and deliberate, as if fighting to maintain composure. In the gallery, Evelyn Hayes pressed a hand over her mouth, trembling. The air in the chamber grew colder, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows. Every word spoken seemed to weigh more than the last, and every second without a confession felt like a victory for the prosecution. The atmosphere became electric, charged with doubt and suspicion. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, barely audible through the thick courthouse walls, an omen of the storm to come. As the prosecution laid out each piece of evidence, tension mounted like a storm rolling in. Anna Carter's voice was relentless, every phrase calculated for maximum impact. Anna said, "The defendant was seen leaving the scene, his fingerprints found on the weapon." Marcus Reed countered, "Fingerprints alone prove nothing. Circumstance does not mean culpability." The judge nodded slowly, eyes narrowing, the courtroom growing smaller with every damning fact. Daniel Hayes clenched his fists beneath the table, trying not to betray any emotion. The jurors' faces grew grave, their faith in justice tested with every detail. Evelyn Hayes buried her face in her hands, unable to look as the prosecutor pointed toward Daniel with finality. The press scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Outside, the rain grew heavier, pelting the courthouse windows, each drop echoing the tension inside. Anna's tone sharpened, cutting through hope. Anna said, "Everything points to one conclusion." Marcus met her words with a defiant shake of his head, whispering to Daniel, "Hold fast." The courtroom was no longer a place of justice, but a crucible, testing everyone's resolve. As Act 1 closed, the pressure inside the courtroom reached a boiling point. Anna Carter stepped back from the lectern, her eyes locked on Daniel, challenging him to break his silence. The judge's voice was low but carried unmistakable authority. Judge Everett said, "The court will recess until further notice." The sound of chairs scraping filled the room, punctuated by the soft sobs of Evelyn Hayes. Marcus Reed leaned in, whispering words only Daniel could hear. Marcus said, "This isn't over, stay strong." Daniel sat unmoving, lost in a storm of memory and fear, the weight of the world bearing down on his shoulders. Journalists surged forward as the judge exited, camera flashes erupting once more, capturing the faces of those battered by tragedy. The rain outside intensified, thunder rolling in the distance. For Daniel, the courtroom became a cage, every eye fixed on him, waiting for a confession that refused to come. His silence, once a shield, now threatened to become his undoing. Act 1 ended with the question hanging heavy in the air. Would Daniel's silence set him free, or seal his fate? The courthouse hallway buzzed with restless energy as the recess unfolded. Marcus Reed paced slowly, his weathered face etched with worry, every step deliberate beneath the cold fluorescent lights. He whispered, "Daniel, you have to trust me. Silence is your armor, but the truth must find a way." Daniel's eyes flickered briefly, doubt and fear warring inside him. The weight of his years spent trapped in unanswered questions pressed down harder now than ever. Outside, rain hammered the stone steps, the gray skies reflecting the somber mood inside. Evelyn Hayes approached cautiously, her voice trembling. "Son, they want you to break? Don't let them." Daniel nodded faintly, a fragile hope flickering behind his guarded expression. The echoes of the courtroom were still ringing in their ears, but now a different battle was beginning, one that required courage beyond words. The courthouse walls, cold and impersonal, seemed to close in around them, but Marcus' calm presence offered a slender lifeline. Outside, distant sirens wove through the storm's roar, a reminder of a world that had not yet forgotten the case, nor the man who refused to speak. Back in the prosecutor's office, Anna Carter reviewed the files again, the weight of the case etched deep into her focused gaze. Her fingers traced the edges of photographs, every detail scrutinized with a relentless hunger for justice. Anna murmured, "There's something they're hiding. I just know it." Her assistant paused, eyes wary. "What if it's not what we think?" Anna shook her head, voice cold but determined. "No, this case will be closed with the truth, no matter how buried." Outside the window, the storm darkened the city's skyline, rain streaking glass in chaotic patterns. The office lights flickered briefly, the tension inside rising like the brewing tempest outside. Anna's phone buzzed. Another lead, another dead end. Yet she refused to relent, driven by a fierce need to unravel the silence that bound Daniel. Her resolve sharpened, she prepared to push harder, to dig deeper, to break through the walls of secrecy. In the quiet hum of the city's night, her thoughts churned, unstoppable and unyielding. Meanwhile, in a cramped, dimly lit apartment several blocks away, Daniel's younger sister, Lily Hayes, scrolled through news reports on her phone. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "They're painting him as a monster, but I know the truth." Her eyes, fierce and determined at 26 years old, flicked to a worn photograph pinned above her desk. Daniel smiling, carefree, before the nightmare began. The room smelled faintly of rain and old coffee. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Meeting tonight, we might have a breakthrough. A flicker of hope sparked inside her. Despite the fear and fatigue, Lily resolved to fight alongside Daniel. She packed a small bag, steeling herself for the battle ahead. Outside, distant thunder rolled, a reminder that storms came in many forms, and she was ready to weather them all. In that small space, surrounded by shadows and memories, determination burned like a steady flame. Later that night, Marcus met with Lily and Daniel in a small secluded cafe, the air thick with whispered urgency. Marcus said, "We've uncovered a witness who saw what really happened." Lily's eyes widened, disbelief and cautious hope mixing. Daniel's lips barely moved, but his heart raced. The dim, warm lighting wrapped around them like a fragile shield from the storm outside. Steam rose from their coffee cups, each sip grounding them in a moment that felt both impossible and necessary. Marcus continued, "This could change everything, but we need to be careful. If the wrong people find out..." Daniel's voice cracked as he said, "I just want the truth to come out." Lily squeezed his hand, steady and strong. Outside, rain lashed the windows in frantic rhythms. The moment was fragile, a thread of hope tangled in fear. The night deepened, and with it, the fragile promise of justice grew just a little brighter. As the meeting ended, Daniel walked alone into the wet night, the rain soaking through his coat, cold droplets running down his face. His thoughts swirled like the storm around him, doubt, fear, and a flicker of hope all battling inside. Each step echoed in the empty street, a rhythm of uncertainty and resolve. He whispered to himself, "If the truth can set me free, then I have to find it, no matter the cost." The city lights blurred through the rain, casting fractured shadows across cracked sidewalks. Behind him, the cafe's warm glow faded into the darkness, a world of secrets closing tight once again. The night air was heavy, charged with promise and peril. Daniel's journey was just beginning, the silence now broken by the faintest murmur of truth waiting to emerge. With every breath, he felt the weight of his past and the uncertain hope of what might come. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with renewed energy, whispers threading through the crowded halls like electricity. Daniel sat in the waiting room, his posture rigid but his mind racing. Marcus approached quietly, a folder clutched in his hand. Marcus said, "We got the witness statement. It's unexpected, could turn the tide." Daniel's eyes flicked up, a mix of hope and dread. The weight of weeks of silence pressed down on him, but now a fragile thread of possibility appeared. Outside, sunlight filtered through rain-streaked windows, casting fractured light across cold marble floors. Evelyn hovered nearby, her presence a steady comfort amid the storm. Marcus continued, "This witness saw someone else at the scene, someone no one suspected." Daniel swallowed hard, heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of fate. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, a battleground of truth and lies, waiting for their next move. Every second ticked toward an unknown future, where silence might finally be shattered. In a quiet corner of the courthouse, Marcus met with Anna Carter in hushed tones, the weight of the case heavy between them. Anna said, "If this witness checks out, it could dismantle our entire prosecution." Marcus replied calmly, "I don't expect you to concede easily, but the truth is more important." Their eyes locked, two warriors on opposite sides, united briefly by the fragile hope of justice. Outside, thunder grumbled faintly, as if echoing the tension between them. Anna's hand rested on a stack of evidence, her fingers twitching, unsure whether to trust or fight harder. Marcus's voice softened, "This case is bigger than either of us." A moment passed, charged with the possibility of change. The courthouse corridor felt colder, the shadows longer. Neither would surrender their cause lightly, but both sensed the ground shifting beneath their feet. Later, Lily Hayes sat alone in her apartment, phone pressed to her ear, voice hushed but urgent. Lily said, "The witness wants to meet, says they have proof to clear Daniel." Her fingers trembled, heart pounding with cautious hope. She paced the room, the photograph of Daniel catching the dim light. Outside, rain drummed softly against the window, matching the rhythm of her breath. The city felt both distant and oppressive. This call could be the key to unraveling years of silence, but fear lingered like a shadow. She whispered, "We're so close now. We have to be ready." Every second felt heavy with expectation, and she clung to the fragile thread of truth, knowing it might be the last chance for her brother's freedom. At the courthouse steps, Daniel met with the witness, a middle-aged man with cautious eyes and a hesitant smile. The witness said, "I saw someone else, not Daniel, leaving that night." Daniel's breath caught, disbelief mingling with hope. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with uncertainty. The witness unfolded a small, crumpled note, new evidence that could rewrite the story. Marcus watched quietly, nodding. Evelyn held Daniel's arm, her voice steady. "This might be the break we needed." The man glanced nervously around, aware of the stakes. Daniel's heart raced as the truth began to edge into the light. The courthouse loomed behind them, a fortress of justice and judgment, but today its walls seemed less insurmountable. For the first time, Daniel dared to imagine a different ending. As the day ended, Daniel sat quietly in his cell, the crumpled note clutched in his hand, light from a barred window casting long shadows. His mind reeled with possibility and fear. He whispered to himself, "This is it. The truth is finally breaking through." The silence around him felt different now, less a cage, more a waiting room for justice. Memories flashed. The night of the incident, the looks of betrayal, the endless months of silence. But now, hope threaded through the darkness. Outside, the courthouse lights flickered against the settling night, a beacon for the battle ahead. Daniel's resolve hardened, the first crack in his silence forming into a fragile voice that might yet shout the truth. Tomorrow, everything could change. The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy creak as the new day dawned, bringing fresh tension that crackled through the air like static. Daniel's eyes were hollow but alert, the crumpled note a secret weight in his pocket. Marcus stood beside him, voice low but resolute. Marcus said, "Today the truth takes the stand." Anna Carter's gaze hardened as she prepared to face the unexpected. The judge's gavel hung suspended, waiting to reclaim its power. The jury shuffled restlessly, sensing the turning tide but unsure what it would bring. Outside, pale sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers across the floor. The gallery was packed, reporters, family, strangers, all hungry for the unfolding drama. Daniel swallowed hard, his silence now a fortress bracing for a breakthrough. Evelyn's whispered prayers filled the silent spaces, and the room seemed to hold its breath. This was no longer just a trial. It was a reckoning. The witness took the stand, a man weathered but steady, eyes flickering with nervous determination. He cleared his throat and said, "I was near the alley that night. I saw someone else, not Daniel, leave in a rush." Anna Carter's brows knitted in disbelief, voice sharp as she challenged, "And why did you stay silent until now?" The witness met her gaze evenly, "Because I feared the consequences." Marcus stepped forward, voice calm and steady. "Thank you for your courage. Your testimony could change everything." The courtroom shifted, some faces skeptical, others hopeful. Daniel's heart thumped wildly, his throat tight with tension. Evelyn clutched her hands tightly, eyes wide with cautious hope. The judge leaned forward, calling for order, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a fragile quiet that mirrored the fragile truth now emerging inside. As the witness detailed what he had seen, the courtroom hung on every word, the tension palpable. The man described a shadowy figure fleeing the scene, distinct from Daniel, his voice steady despite the weight of scrutiny. Anna Carter's fingers tapped impatiently on her notes, searching for cracks. Marcus nodded slightly, a rare smile flickering. Daniel's chest tightened with the possibility of freedom, but doubt still clawed inside him. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears, a silent prayer of gratitude. The judge called a brief recess, his voice cutting through the charged silence. Outside the courtroom, the city hummed beneath darkening clouds, a storm gathering on the horizon. Each second felt heavier, the scales of justice balancing on a knife's edge. The courtroom was a crucible, truth and lies melting into an uncertain future. And Daniel's silence was no longer empty, it was the quiet before a revolution. During the recess, Marcus gathered Daniel and Evelyn in a quiet corridor away from prying eyes. Marcus said firmly, "This witness could save you, but we need to prepare for a counterattack." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. What if they discredit him? What if it's not enough? Evelyn squeezed Daniel's hand, her voice steady. "We have to believe, Daniel. It's all we have." Marcus looked at them both, eyes steely with resolve. The prosecution will come hard, but truth has its own power. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, shadows flickering against cold tile walls. Outside, distant thunder rumbled, a reminder that the fight was far from over. But inside that narrow hall, hope burned brighter than fear. The courtroom awaited their return, and with it, the battle for Daniel's freedom surged back to life. Every heartbeat was a countdown to reckoning. The courtroom reconvened under a thick blanket of silence, the jury's eyes sharper, the tension unrelenting. Anna Carter rose with renewed vigor, voice cutting like a blade as she launched a fierce cross-examination. Anna said, "Your testimony is convenient, but why now? How do we know you're telling the truth?" The witness' hands trembled, but his voice stayed steady. "Because I can no longer live with the silence." Daniel sat upright, every muscle taut, eyes locked on the witness with a fragile hope. Evelyn's breath hitched, the room closing in with a suffocating weight of expectation. The judge's gavel hovered, ready to strike, the fate of the silent defendant hanging in the balance. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, tapping on the courthouse windows like a slow, steady heartbeat. This was the moment justice and truth would collide, and nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on the witness as Anna Carter launched a final barrage of questions. Her voice was sharp, measured, relentless. Anna said, "You claim to have seen someone else, yet your testimony contradicts multiple pieces of evidence. How do you explain that?" The witness swallowed, hands trembling slightly. "I only know what I saw." Marcus Reed rose calmly, his voice steady. "Isn't it possible others wanted Daniel to take the fall?" Daniel's heart pounded as he listened, the courtroom air thick with doubt and suspicion. Evelyn's fingers twitched in her lap, silent prayers flooding her mind. The judge observed closely, his expression unreadable. Outside, storm clouds gathered once more, casting a somber shadow through the courtroom's stained glass. The fragile hope that had bloomed began to waver, the truth tangled in a web of uncertainty and fear. Every word seemed to raise the stakes higher, justice balanced precariously on a razor's edge. Outside the courtroom, whispers of the testimony spread quickly through the halls, thick with speculation and tension. Marcus met with Lily Hayes in a quiet corner, her eyes wide with concern. Marcus said, "The prosecution is tightening their grip. We have to prepare for their next move." Lily's voice was barely audible. "What if the truth isn't enough?" Marcus's gaze was unwavering. "It has to be. We fight with every ounce of strength." Rain began to patter on the courthouse roof, a steady rhythm against the tense silence. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on them, but resolve burned bright. They knew the fight was far from over. Each moment outside the courtroom was a breath held, a plan formed, a hope clung to fiercely. The truth was still alive, fragile but unyielding. Back inside the courtroom, Daniel sat with clenched fists, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Marcus approached the jury box, voice firm and clear. Marcus said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not just about evidence but about truth and justice. We ask you to look beyond the surface, to question what has been presented." The jurors exchanged glances, their faces revealing cracks of doubt and reconsideration. Anna Carter frowned, watching Marcus carefully. Evelyn sat silently, eyes fixed on Daniel with a mixture of hope and fear. The judge's stern gaze softened slightly, as if sensing the shifting tides. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting shafts of light into the courtroom, a fragile symbol of possibility. The battle was far from won, but the momentum had changed. Daniel's silence now spoke louder than any words could. As the trial wore on, the tension inside the courtroom thickened to a near breaking point. Anna Carter stood to present new forensic analysis, voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Anna said, "This evidence contradicts the witness claim and supports the prosecution's case beyond doubt." Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Evelyn gasped softly. Marcus leaned forward, ready to challenge, but the judge raised a hand to restore order. The jurors sat frozen, caught in a tempest of conflicting truths. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain hammering the courthouse windows like a drum beat of fate. The courtroom felt like a battleground where every piece of evidence was a weapon. Daniel's silence wavered, his resolve tested by the rising tide of opposition. The fight for justice was no longer a quiet struggle. It was a storm roaring toward its inevitable climax. The judge called for a recess as the weight of the evidence pressed down like a hammer. Marcus gathered Daniel and Evelyn in a quiet corner, his voice low but steady. Marcus said, "We have one last option, a chance to bring the real truth forward, but it's risky." Daniel's eyes searched Marcus's face, hope and fear mingling. Evelyn squeezed Daniel's hand firmly. "Whatever it takes, we're with you." Outside, thunder rolled ominously, a reminder that the storm was far from over. The quiet before the next storm was charged with possibility and peril. Daniel's silence had carried him this far, but now it was time to decide if it would save him or break him. The courtroom hummed with a tense energy as Daniel's fate edged closer to revelation. Marcus stepped forward with a new piece of evidence, his voice calm but charged with urgency. Marcus said, "Your Honor, we submit this new testimony and forensic report that completely alter the narrative." Anna Carter's eyes narrowed, a flash of surprise flickering across her face before she masked it with steely resolve. Daniel's gaze was fixed, a mixture of hope and anxiety etched across his pale features. Evelyn sat with clenched fists, barely breathing as the judge carefully examined the documents. The jury leaned in, their collective attention sharpening. Outside, storm clouds darkened the sky once again, mirroring the brewing storm inside. This moment was a turning point, the fragile hope of justice held in delicate balance between truth and doubt. The silence in the room was heavy, charged with the weight of what was to come. Anna Carter rose, her voice sharp and unyielding, as she questioned the validity of the new evidence. Anna said, "This new report is convenient but inconsistent with previous findings." Marcus countered, "Convenience does not equate falsehood. We ask the court to consider all facts." The judge's gaze flickered between them, weighing each word carefully. Daniel's jaw tightened as doubt and hope wrestled within him. Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears, her breath steady despite the tension. The jury scribbled notes rapidly, the courtroom electric with anticipation. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap rhythmically against the stained glass windows. This was the crucible, where truth and deception collided, and Daniel's silence teetered on the brink of collapse or salvation. As the debate intensified, the witness from earlier was called back to clarify key points. The man's voice was steady but cautious as he elaborated, "I saw a shadow near the alley. It wasn't Daniel." Anna pressed, "Can you be absolutely certain? The consequences are severe." The witness nodded slowly, "I'm sure. I've carried this burden too long." Marcus whispered encouragement to Daniel, who listened with bated breath. Evelyn's hands clasped tightly together, eyes never leaving the witness. The judge called for calm, reminding all that the pursuit was for truth, not assumption. Outside, thunder rumbled low, a distant warning that the storm of judgment was not yet over. The courtroom hung in suspended anticipation, each word weighted with the power to change a life. In the hushed moments before closing arguments, Marcus met Daniel and Evelyn in the holding area. Marcus said softly, "We've done everything we can. Now it's in the jury's hands." Daniel's voice was barely audible. "I've carried this silence for too long. I just want the truth to be heard." Evelyn squeezed his hand, tears glistening. The overhead lights cast long shadows across the tiled floor, echoing the uncertainty ahead. Outside, Rain lashed the courthouse, wind whispering like distant voices of doubt and hope. Marcus's calm demeanor was a steady anchor as they prepared for the final, decisive moments. The courtroom awaited, and with it, the verdict that could either shatter or save. Daniel's silence had been his refuge. Now it was the last line of defense. The courtroom fell silent as the jury returned, their faces unreadable. Judge Everett's voice broke the quiet. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson rose, voice steady but grave. "We have, Your Honor." Daniel's breath caught, his hands trembling on the defense table. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, a fragile hope blooming. Anna Carter's expression was unreadable. Marcus leaned forward, eyes fixed on the foreperson. Tension was palpable. Seconds stretched like hours. Outside, the rain eased, the storm slowly passing, leaving a heavy calm. The verdict would shatter silence, seal fate, or set free. And Daniel's world teetered on the edge of transformation. The moment of truth had arrived. The courtroom was suffused with a heavy silence as the foreperson began to speak. Every breath felt drawn and still, like the moment itself was stretched thin. Foreperson said, "We find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a mixture of shock, relief, and disbelief. Daniel's body relaxed as if a weight lifted, tears welling in his eyes. Evelyn clutched his hand tightly, her face flooded with joy and exhaustion. Anna Carter's lips pressed into a thin line, swallowing hard against the unexpected verdict. Marcus Reed exhaled deeply, a rare smile breaking through his weary expression. The judge nodded solemnly, banging the gavel to restore order. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment when silence finally broke, and truth triumphed. Outside, the sky cleared, sunlight spilling into the courthouse like a benediction. The verdict was a turning point, not just for Daniel, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by this story. As the courtroom emptied, Daniel stepped outside for the first breath of freedom in months. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of rain-washed streets and blooming flowers. He said quietly, "I never thought I'd hear that word again." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining. "You held on when so many gave up." Marcus stood nearby, nodding. "This is your second chance, don't waste it." The city bustled around them, unaware of the battle just won. Daniel's steps were slow but determined, every stride a reclaiming of life. The sun broke through lingering clouds, warming his face as hope flickered stronger than fear. This was a beginning, fragile, precious, and real. The silence that had once been his prison was now a quiet promise of the future. Together they walked toward that uncertain horizon, ready to face whatever came next. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his modest apartment, the weight of the day settling around him. He whispered to himself, "Freedom isn't the end. It's the start of something harder." Memories of silence and doubt flickered behind his eyes. The walls were quiet, but no longer suffocating. He traced the edges of the crumpled note that had changed everything, feeling the fragile thread of truth in his hands. Outside, the city lights twinkled through rain-speckled windows, a distant hum of life moving forward. Daniel's expression was thoughtful, tempered with cautious hope. He knew the road ahead would be long, scarred by past wounds, but for the first time, the silence was not his prison. It was a voice waiting to be heard. Tomorrow was uncertain, but tonight, peace settled softly over the moment. The following day, Daniel met with Lily and Marcus in a quiet cafe, their faces etched with relief and cautious optimism. Lily said, "We fought for your silence to mean something," and it did. Marcus nodded. The truth finally broke through the noise. Daniel smiled faintly. "It's not over, but it's a start." Outside, sunlight warmed the bustling streets. The storm finally passed. They spoke quietly, plans forming to rebuild and to heal. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the bond between them was stronger than ever. In the small space, surrounded by the hum of everyday life, hope blossomed quietly. Their fight had carved a path through darkness, a path toward redemption, justice, and the fragile promise of peace. As the sun set, Daniel stood alone on a quiet rooftop, city lights twinkling below like distant stars. He breathed deeply, the night air cool against his skin. He whispered softly, "The silence is broken, but the journey has just begun." Memories of courtroom battles and quiet prayers danced behind his eyes. The city stretched endlessly before him, a maze of possibilities and challenges. In that moment, Daniel felt both small and infinite. The truth had set him free, but freedom demanded courage, resilience, and hope. The final gavel had fallen, but life's next verdict was still unwritten. He smiled faintly, the silence now his strength, his voice ready to rise. The night held a quiet promise, one of new beginnings and unshakable resolve.